Welcome to Unit 25. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about urinary system anatomy. Urinary system essentially is the system that controls how waste is removed by the body through the kidneys. Now, the kidneys are the primary urinary system organ. When we talk about the urinary system, from the medical point of view, we're talking about either nephrology, nephro referring to the kidneys, or urology, which is the surgical field where urinary system is studied and surgeons operate on the urinary tract. Now, from our point of view, we want to talk about the functions and the overall structure anatomically in this system. Now, so the urinary system consists of many different functions. Main function, essentially, obviously, is removal of waste, especially metabolic waste. When you're thinking about waste removal in the digestive system that came from food, that is one type of waste. And then cellular processes throughout the body also produce different kinds of molecules that are unnecessary, are removed from the cells, and these molecules go into the bloodstream and must be eventually removed, and they are removed primarily by the urinary system. So removal of metabolic waste is very important for the system. Also, conservation of good molecules like glucose, other sugars, water, and electrolytes also is a kind of a key component here. Keep in mind also, because so much blood passes through the kidneys are able to control water balance and control pH balance in the body to a significant extent, and that's an important component as well here. Not something that everyone thinks immediately of the kidneys, but is a critical component, and that's because kidneys are able to either hold on to more acids or get rid of excess acids depending on the conditions in the body to compensate for other changes in the pH of the blood. Right? Just like we learned in the respiratory system is able to do that with carbon dioxide, here we're doing that with secretion of H+ or hydrogen ions. Another important aspect of the kidneys, again something that's often is neglected, is that kidneys are technically hormonal as well, and they're able to secrete certain hormones. Two particularly important ones is erythropoietin and renin. Erythropoietin is the type of hormone that is sent from the kidneys to the red bone marrow, and in the bone marrow, remember, we are producing our red blood cells and other types of cells and that go into the blood, and so specifically for the red blood cell production, erythropoietin is crucial. So it comes from the kidneys, goes to the bone marrow, and tells the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And renin is the hormone that controls essentially blood pressure and deals with the cardiovascular system, and multiple organs are involved here. So again, erythropoietin, thinking about red blood cell production, renin, control of blood pressure. Now, when we're thinking about the organs that are involved here, we're thinking about primarily the kidneys. The kidneys, remember, are retroperitoneal, meaning they're located in the kind of posterior kind of back section of the body, behind the digestive system organs, so behind the peritoneal cavity. The kidneys, both right and left kidney, are essentially identical. They're covered by the fibrous capsule and significant fat deposits that insulate the kidney externally. When you remove all those separate layers, you get to the internal structure, and we kind of slice through the kidneys. Let's say in dissection, like an autopsy, we would see the kidney consists of three separate areas. The outer area is the renal cortex, has a sort of a lighter pinkish color to it. The renal medulla, which is darker in color, and the deepest area, which is the renal pelvis. Of these, the two main actual cellular components are primarily the renal cortex and renal medulla, and the renal pelvis is mostly essentially a space where urine would be deposited as it's trying to drain out of the kidney. So again, when you're looking at histology slides of the kidney, you're primarily looking at the renal cortex and the renal medulla, because that's where most of the cells are. Then in the renal cortex, we're going to start the beginnings of the main functional unit of the kidney, which is the nephron, and then continuation of the nephron with lots of vasculature, lots of blood vessels, and other components happens in the renal medulla. So again, we're going to go through this again when we talk about in more detail the nephron, and when you're looking at illustrations of the kidney, make sure to pay attention to the nephron to see the structure, to see how it's kind of interconnected to the blood vessels of the kidney and the rest of the anatomy there. And like I said before, once the urine has been produced, once blood has been filtered, after going through the cortex and medulla, that urine, that final sort of waste product, is ready to enter the renal pelvis, and there it's separated into what's called major and minor calyces, which are basically these sort of sink-like components where the urine can drain and eventually connect to the ureters, which will drain the urine out of the kidneys towards the bladder in the pelvis. Now, so how will the urine again get from the kidneys to the bladder? Well, there are these two muscular tubes consisting of smooth muscle called the ureters, right? One for each kidney, and they go from the retroperitoneal area of the kidneys and cross towards that sort of anterior of the pelvis down below where the urinary bladder is located. Obviously, there's certain differences between male and female anatomy here. But essentially, the ureters bring the urine, drain it down through the process of peristalsis, so smooth muscle contractions of urine, down into the bladder. And the bladder is this muscular pouch consisting of multiple layers of smooth muscle and internally consisting of transitional epithelium. Remember, this is a type of epithelium that has two separate states depending on whether urine is present or not present in that area, so making either the cells flat when there's pressure being imposed on the cells, or if the bladder is relaxed and empty with no urine, then the cells kind of are very large and plump and sort of bounce back. So additionally, there's also these rugae, these folds, kind of like we had in the stomach, very similar fashion, that are in the bladder. And overall, the function again of the bladder is to hold urine and to store it temporarily before you have a chance to empty urine out in the bathroom, right? So once enough urine, around 200 or so ml, accumulates in the bladder, all kinds of stretch receptors are activated in the trigon of the bladder. Trigon is essentially this triangular area that you can connect if you connect the three separate openings in the bladder, right? The two ureters, right and left, and then the urethra at the bottom. When you connect it, you get the trigon of the bladder. This trigon has the smooth surface because it has multiple sensitive receptors that go to the brain to let you know, okay, you have enough urine now in the bladder, ready to go to the bathroom to empty out that bladder, okay, to get rid of the urine. So, and then once you're ready to empty out the bladder, right, the urethra comes into play here, and we have voluntary and involuntary sphincters into urethra, these smooth circular muscles that can open, whether by demand, whether again voluntarily or involuntarily, and they will release the urine. The important feature here to remember is that in the female, the urethra is very short and essentially empties by gravity, so it travels very short distance. And in the male, the urethra is much longer because it goes through the penis and through the prostate and through essentially the reproductive system, because it has the function of carrying the semen out of the body and also carrying urine as part of the urinary system, right? So again, the female urethra is very short, the male urethra is much longer. The shortness of the female urethra contributes to some extent to the much higher risk of urinary tract infections or UTIs, while UTIs in male patients are uncommon and mostly associated with catheters and other kind of surgical manipulations inside the urethra. Why, again, is the UTI is more common in the female? Because that shorter distance of the urethra means the bacteria has less distance to travel from the skin, from the external surfaces, towards the urethra and towards the bladder, and causing higher risk of those kinds of infections. Now, the most important component in the kidney is the functional unit of the kidney. Now, so this component is called the nephron, right? Remember, nephro, anything refers to the kidney. So when you're looking at the nephron, make sure to see the illustrations in the textbook, in the lab manual. And you'll see a fairly complex kind of looping structure, right? So remember, when you're looking at the kidney through the microscope, most of the time what you're seeing are those simple cuboidal cells in these different pipe-like structures. And that's essentially what the nephron is. So before I go into the actual structure of the nephron, let's briefly go over some of the main functional components here and what the kidney is doing for us, what the nephron is doing for us. By the way, there are thousands, if not millions, of nephrons in the kidneys, and the more nephrons are functioning, the better the kidney is functioning. And if some person is losing some of their nephrons, or they become unusable or sort of disabled, then that means the kidney function is decreasing. Right? So it's not one nephron per kidney, it's many nephrons, and together they help filter out the blood, remove waste, and contribute to the healthy state and healthy physiology of the person. So each individual nephron essentially will take some blood, clean it out, filter it, reabsorb molecules back into the blood that are good, and everything that's waste will be mixed with water and removed as urine out of the body. So we have glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. Glomerular filtration, right, this is the beginning, the glomerule is the beginning part of the kidney, which is this ball of capillaries there. So water, glucose, electrolytes, nitrogen-containing waste, all of these molecules will pass under high pressure from blood into the nephron. As this is happening also, and this filtrate is going through the nephron, we also have tubular absorption taking place. And tubular absorption means useful substances, like good molecules like glucose, sometimes maybe proteins, other things that we do not want to lose, do not want to get rid of as waste, need to be reabsorbed, right? So the capillaries of the kidneys are very different from regular capillaries. They actually have a lot of sort of spaces in such a way so to allow molecules to quickly pass through it. And those substances that we need, that are useful for us, that are beneficial to the body, must be reabsorbed. When we do this, we call this tubular reabsorption. And then some molecules that are waste, like drugs, like excess potassium ions, all kinds of other basically bad, we'll say, molecules, will be secreted out, or essentially removed forcefully into the urine, right? Removed out of the kidney so that the urine can take these substances, and right, they are waste, they need to be removed out of the body. So when we're talking about waste, removal of that waste, we talk about tubular secretion, and so these unwanted substances are removed in this way. Now, what are the main structural components of the nephron? Essentially, we have, you can split it into two main areas. We have the renal corpuscle. Okay, it's like a renal body, the beginnings of the nephron, where that glomerulus is, that ball of capillaries where filtration starts, and then the rest of the renal tubules. Now, that ball of capillaries also is kind of enclosed by what's called the Bowman's capsule. This is where we start to catch the filtrate and kind of continue the process of filtration there. And from that point on, the Bowman's capsule essentially continues as the proximal convoluted tubule. Right? Proximal means closer. Convoluted means that it makes these kind of turns. It's not a straight tubule, right? And then the tubule. This is all, by the way, happening inside the renal cortex. And once we enter what's called the loop of Henle, this drops down all the way to the renal medulla, and multiple blood vessels there, as we already know, will surround the loop of Henle, allowing fast exchange of electrolytes, water, and other molecules to happen there. So this loop continues quite a bit down into the renal medulla, and then when it comes back, right, we again now are in the cortex, and we call this area now distal convoluted tubule. And after this, the continuation here is into the collecting ducts, which will merge into the major minor calyces of the renal pelvis, and there the urine will be on its way to the ureters and down into the bladder. Okay, so again, to summarize this, we start with the glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, we go through these different tubules, drop down into medulla, come back to the cortex, and after this, going into the collecting ducts and into the renal pelvis. In order to make sure that the kidney is doing its job properly, kind of control to some extent what's happening at the level of the nephron, we have these specialized cells in the nephron called the juxtaglomerular apparatus, or JGA for short. And this is the area where there are cells, the kind of specialized cells. They're not there to filter anything, but they're to actually detect and control the flow of the filtrate and control the blood pressure in the nephron, and are essentially related to that function of renin, like we talked about before. Again, this is a fairly complex topic. Make sure to look at all the illustrations in the book, both in the textbook and in the lab manual, and pay attention to all the different structural and functional components for the urinary system.